being fully in charge of your own calendar is an amazing feeling, and developing some great self-employment hygiene is awesome.
Welcome to the RV Entrepreneur Podcast, the weekly show for nomads, work campers, RVers, and entrepreneurs looking to earn a living or build a business while enjoying the RV lifestyle. This week's host is Jim Nelson. Let's settle in and enjoy the RV Entrepreneur Podcast, brought to you by RV Life.
Alaska, the last frontier. These are the voyages of an RV entrepreneur on a 10-day mission to lead a caravan of nomads who seek out adventure on the Alaska highway, to boldly go where all full-timers dream to go, safely while enjoying the journey. No, I'm not Jim Kirk, I'm Jim Nelson. And on this episode of the RVE podcast, we're talking all about Alaska, or at least the trip there, and how one RV entrepreneur has built a business around helping others check the trek to Alaska off their bucket list. Have you driven the Alcan? Then my discussion with Kim Ryals is sure to stir up some fond memories, and maybe a couple scary ones. If you've never made the trip to Alaska and hope to someday, well, turn that someday syndrome into an action plan and get ready to take some notes. Kim is an entrepreneur who has commuted to Alaska every spring to run her affinity travel and retreat business, helping people explore remote reaches of the Alaskan frontier. After noticing the number of large RV caravans along the way, she established Caravan to Alaska. Search that term and you'll see the brilliance behind naming her company that. Kim leads smaller groups of RVs on 10-day trips north to Alaska. The agenda is much more relaxed, allowing travelers the freedom to explore, while still providing the comfort of support and guidance from someone who knows her way around the Yukon and Alaskan highways. Kim also has connections to ensure you'll enjoy certain activities and destinations others might miss if only following the milepost. Check the show notes if you don't know what that is. Now, buckle up and get ready for everything you need to know about RVing to Alaska and much more. Kim and I also discuss business formation, like whether you should be a sole proprietor or form an LLC. Of course, we talk about internet on the road, and we address that elusive life-work balance often discussed on this show. But first, please support the folks who help make this show possible. This episode is made possible by Travelfy. Want reliable internet without the hassle? Meet Travelfy. It's portable, high-speed Wi-Fi that's ready to go wherever you are. From road trips to remote cabins. No tricky setup or permanent location required. Just plug in and you're connected. And here's the best part. No contracts, no commitments, and no reactivation fees. Pay only for the months you need. Travelfy connects to the strongest available signal among multiple major networks, so you stay online with confidence, backed by a US-based support team that knows the outdoor lifestyle. Travelfy, simplifying internet while you travel. Visit travelfy.com today. That's TRAVLFI.com. Listeners can save 15% with code RVE at checkout. Kim, thanks so much for joining me. This is going to be an exciting discussion because we have a lot in common regarding Alaska and caravans to Alaska, which I've never taken, but you know a lot about. So welcome.
Hey, Jim. Thanks for having me today.
Oh, you're so welcome. Like I said, Renee and I spent a year in Alaska. We spent the winter there, so I'm sure we have plenty of stories to share because you've been up there off and on for over a decade, from what I hear. We're going to get into that. You now run an RV tour company going to Alaska, Caravan to Alaska, and we're going to get into all the details about this. But first, this is technically the RV Life Entrepreneur Podcast. So I wanted to ask you, as I ask all my guests, when did you first discover the RV life, and how is that any different now?
Okay, well, I come from a family that has always been into outdoor recreation. My father has had an RV he's 90 and I'm about to turn 60. And growing up, we always had an RV. He hasn't been out much lately as he's getting on in years, but a lot of our family experiences were spent outdoors, camping, RVing. My dad's very proud to say that he has about 300,000 miles under his belt with his motorhomes and everything. So I guess that's probably what planted the seed. And I enjoyed travel and road trips in general. So it's always been a part of my life.
And what was your first RV? Your own?
Oh, my first RV actually was this little 10-foot, well, I guess it's 11-foot tip to tail teardrop trailer. It was a vintage, and it was super cute and super tough and had a queen size bed inside and some shelves and storage and, the pop top in the back where you've got the kitchen and everything. And I've had that for a number of years, and it has served me well. And I took it up to Alaska last summer, had a blast out of it, and ended up selling it in Alaska and coming back down last fall. And I'm now looking into getting into a Class C. Not a very big Class C, a 20-foot Class C, but I understand it's actually supposed to be born on the assembly line, I think, today or tomorrow. So
how exciting.
I'm sitting here like an expectant parent.
Sure, that is exciting. Sure, that is exciting. And that must have been a tough little trailer if you took it up to Alaska multiple times. We're going to get into that. And we're going to talk about your various business endeavors relating to Alaska and the trips up and back. But what does it mean to be an entrepreneur? You've been working for yourself for a while now. What does it take?
Yeah, so my career has been in executive management for nonprofits, and a lot of times people who are outside the nonprofit sector don't realize that they are indeed businesses. They're just in business to do public good, like dog shelters or clean air and that kind of thing. And so my business and administration skills and experience have been there for a couple of decades now. And having come out of Alaska full time and coming back to the lower 48, and again, getting upwards in years, I just decided it was time for me to go out and do my own thing. So I started a couple of businesses, and I've really been enjoying them. They're one-person businesses. One's a sole proprietorship and one's an LLC. But I really love the freedom, the independence, the being in charge of my own calendar. And then when you kind of, add full-time digital nomad in RV life into that, I kind of feel like I'm always working, but I'm always also on vacation. So whatever that crazy combination alchemy is, it really works for me.
Awesome. So let's back up just a bit. What did you do before starting this caravan business, even before your other business endeavors? I understand you're still doing one of those, but what was the backstory a little bit before you started Caravan to Alaska?
Yeah, so my formal education is as a fish and wildlife biologist. And so I've spent almost all of my career in the public sector and working for non-government organizations and keeping water clean and watersheds healthy.
Good.
And a little bit of that has been working for a state agency, but most of it has been for larger nonprofits and watershed councils.
Tell me about the retreat business you were telling me about. So once in Alaska, I believe you were working for a fish company, correct? And then you started to do another business. Can you tell me how that kind of transition worked out for you?
Sure. So I moved up as a fish and wildlife biologist who loves to go outside. I'll have to tell you that Alaska was on my radar screen for years and years. And I was always in the market for looking for employment up there. So my first venture up into Alaska was to take the position of executive director for the Copper River Salmon brand out of Cordova, Alaska. And that organization is like a business league or a chamber of commerce to promote what is clearly the best salmon on the market. Now, that's a blend of truth and my own bias. But so I was working with a fishing fleet that brings Alaska's first fresh salmon to market every year. It's the first one. It's in mid-May. And that was off the road system in a community called Cordova, Alaska. So I was in that position for a while and decided I wanted to move on to the road system and ended up being the executive director for a Trails and Parks Foundation, which was responsible for developing, connecting, and maintaining trails mostly, and some parks in the Matsu Borough, which is the 25,000 square mile area just north of Anchorage. So those were my employed positions up in Alaska.
Yeah, you're referring to the Matanuska-Susitna Valley area, which is between two mountain ranges there. And out on Cordova, when you say the road system, people may not be aware that a lot, maybe most of Alaska is inaccessible, at least until winter, because you're out on the islands in the Aleutians, wasn't it, Cordova?
Cordova is actually on the Prince William Sound.
Okay. But only
so
accessible by boat.
Boat or plane, about, I'd say 120 air miles from Anchorage, which doesn't sound like a lot. But when I have driven it before, say from Palmer or Anchorage, I say driving, but travel to it in my vehicle would take 12 to 14 hours for those 120 miles, because you're driving through Anchorage, down to the Kenai Peninsula, going to Whittier, taking the tunnel, getting to Whittier, getting on the Alaska Marine Highway ferry system, and then taking 6 hours across Prince William Sound. Right. So it is a little bit out of the way. Yeah.
I've been to Whittier, and that tunnel, people will have to, maybe I'll share a link to our story about the tunnel through Whittier, but that's exciting and a different story in itself. So you moved back to the mainland, let's say, to start your own business, or how did that happen?
That was when I took the position in Trails and Parks.
Okay.
And that lasted a few years. And that was, I was the first staff person for this organization. So it was really neat developing a strategic plan, what to do with some of the outdoor space in the Matanuska-Susitna Borough, which is what has been one of the fastest growing areas in Alaska over the last 10 to 15 years.
And at some point, did you get the entrepreneurial bug, or did you have a side hustle? Tell me about the retreat business that you started up.
Yeah. So at some point, I wanted to come out of Alaska full time. The winters are kind of tough, not because they're cold in my case, but because the days are so short. I had aging parents. I have an elderly dog. There's a few reasons why I didn't want to spend year round in Alaska. So I came down into the lower 48, and I just wasn't all that jazzed about getting reemployed or applying for jobs and becoming someone else's employee. So basically what I did was I looked through my own personal and professional toolbox, I guess because I'm a fishing person, we'll call it a tackle box. And I took kind of an inventory of my skills, experiences, knowledge, and tried to be honest with myself about some of the things that I was good with. And so two things kind of emerged at the same time. One of them was I knew a lot about Alaska and some of my favorite corners that a lot of people don't get to see when they go to Alaska as a tourist. And again, I could help nonprofits do better business. So I started two at the same time. It was nonprofit consulting, and that was for any type of missions who want to come to me and say, hey, we'd like a better strategic plan. We'd like to know how to raise money. We'd like to get involved in advocacy. That was one business, and that's a sole proprietorship. The other business was putting together it's small group travel, affinity based, and these are retreats for groups of people who want to visit Cordova. And so those retreats are often 20 to 50 people big, and they're in one place, again, off the road system. They have a personal and very deep connection with Cordova. It's one of the least visited places in Alaska. And what I have ended up doing is approaching people, say an author, a physician, an athlete, anyone with a following who would like to lead a retreat or a workshop, inviting them to come to Cordova, do the retreat or workshop, invite the people who are following them. Then I run all the logistics, and we split the revenue at the end of the event. So that's how that shaped up.
Wonderful. And when did that start to take off? I'm trying to paint the calendar here. How long ago was that?
Yeah. So I opened both of the businesses in 2019. Okay. And one thing you might immediately notice off the bat, both of those businesses were centered around groups of people meeting in person. So with the nonprofit consulting, I pivoted to online, being able to connect with people over Zoom and whatnot. And I did have to take a break with the retreat business over the pandemic. But then since the things have opened back up and there was a little bit of lag time, the retreat business is coming to bear. The name of that business is Let's Meet in Alaska. And
Wonderful.
So we've got our 2025 retreats all planned and on the books, the calendar. And we are currently looking for small groups who want to have retreats up in Alaska for 2026.
Wonderful. So for basically 5 years, you've been more or less commuting to Alaska. You say you don't spend the winters there, so you've been going up, managing the business up there. And on one of those trips back south, you noticed something going on that spurred a new business idea?
Yes. Oh, okay. So up and down, back and forth to Alaska. And it's been those 5 years and some other trips in between in the last decade. So I think at last count, it's been about 15 or 16 trips back and forth to Alaska. And, when I moved up there, I drove myself up there and I felt there was, it was an endeavor. I did a lot of research. I had not driven internationally before. Canada is wide open and remote. I did as much research as I could online to ensure that I was going to have a safe, enjoyable, and comfortable trip. So then I started going back and forth to Alaska on my own driving, and I would invariably notice that there was caravans of RVs going back and forth. It just piqued my curiosity, and I started learning more, talking to some of the people and learning more about the caravan services themselves. And, what I noticed a few years ago was that many of the caravans, the smallest one that I had come in contact was with maybe 15 rigs, but some of them are really large at 25, 30, 50 rigs, maybe.
Yeah.
And they're very comprehensive. A lot of them are 30 to 60 days long. They provide a lot of the meals. They do a lot of your entertainment and sightseeing for you. So they make a lot of reservations. There's a lot that those caravans have to offer.
Sure.
They're very comprehensive. A person would just need to sign up and jump aboard, and they've got everything dialed in for you for the next, say, 2 months or so.
Right.
But at the same time, when I moved up there, and again in my travels back and forth, I thought there could be an opportunity for RVers who wanted something different. And by different, I mean smaller, maybe 7, 8, 10, 15 rigs. Just the cruise up, not a month or two at a time. Maybe wanted to plan their own adventures and make their own reservations for different parts of Alaska as they saw fit, and what have you. And I will have to say I noticed, again, and also the traveling with, you could be traveling with up to 100 people.
Right.
And that's a dynamic unto itself. And a lot of those caravans will charge $10,000 per person.
Wow.
And even the second person is $10,000. So I just felt inspired to share what I had learned and experienced and the way I've kind of curated my trips up and down, make them shorter, smaller, maybe more for the independent person who wants a little bit of support on the way up, but is really comfortable making their own touring reservations and that kind of thing. Just the level of support that I would have wanted on my first drive to Alaska.
Bid farewell to the stress of travel planning with RV Life Trip Wizard. This feature allows you to customize your routes, avoid potential hazards, and even discover the best campgrounds based on real user reviews. It's not just about reaching your destination, it's about enjoying the journey. And with RV Life Trip Wizard, every journey is effortless. Learn more about this game-changing feature at rvlife.com.
Sure, good for you for identifying that niche, because I've seen on our 2 trips up there those huge caravans, and they seem so structured and so organized. And I'm sure there's an audience that wants to have everything kind of planned out for them, when they're stopping, when the meals are. I understand yours are a bit more loose, and you include certain stays along the trip, and then other ones are people are more or less given direction on where to camp. And I think that stems from kind of the Alaskan spirit. the kind of DIY and the ruggedness of, going adventurous. I mean, it is the last frontier. So tell me a bit about the logistics of managing these trips. You leave twice, so you must have two fleets or wagon masters, as they say. You don't come back down for the second one, do you? Do you lead one? What are the logistics of managing two trips to Alaska?
So it is just me, and my trips are limited to 15 rigs. For 2025, we just have myself and 9 other rigs. And what I do is I coordinate everyone to meet in the state of Washington. And I've designed a 10-day tour. I call it a cruise, but it's obviously we're driving.
Sure.
I call it a cruise because you can get to Alaska in 4 or 5 days, but to me, it's going to hurt. It's not going to be comfortable. So it's 40 hours of driving from Washington State up to South Central Alaska. 40 hours, 1 week. You're averaging 4 hours of drive a day. So everybody musters at a state park in Washington, at least by the night before we obviously cross the border. And then we set out together as a group, and I have 10 nights planned. I only make 3 reservations. We travel as a group the entire time. And I feel like I'm offering the best of the places, the overnights that I really enjoy. And what I'll do is make a group reservation for everyone for 3 of the 10 nights. Those are strategically selected for points along the route, the beginning, just to get our footing, halfway up for a little bit of restocking, and then as we enter Alaska, kind of on our farewell, the group's dispersing now. And those 3 reservations are they're in towns in British Columbia, the Yukon, and right over at the border in Alaska. And they're in towns, and they are at RV parks that have a delightful mix of different amenities. Mm-hmm. And those could be anything from laundry and showers to RV washes, rig washes, a tavern, a restaurant, just good things. Feel like a Lone Ranger coming in from the field. You're coming to town and you're going to get clean. Your clothes are going to be clean. Your rig's going to be clean. You're going to have a professionally made cocktail. So those are the 3 reservations that are included in the 10-day drive. Outside of that, I have a general sketch of where we'll be staying in provincial parks, and those reservations are the responsibility of each member of the caravan. And those are some of the most beautiful places I've ever traveled.
Yes.
They're mostly in Canada. They're inexpensive. They average $20 Canadian, which is about $15 US. Non-developed, but gorgeous places.
Gorgeous indeed. And we can send people to your website to learn all about these trips. But I want to put on the business hat for just a minute here. Like you've managed 3 different kind of companies, businesses here for a while. And you mentioned sole proprietor versus LLC. Can you give us kind of a brief overview of like when someone might need to organize as an LLC versus being a sole proprietor? Renee and I have operated our business for 20 plus years as a sole proprietor. And I see people out there giving advice, you've got to get a LLC right away. So what inspired, organizing as an LLC type entity versus operating as a sole prop, and what type of businesses might require one versus the other?
For me, the delineation was pretty simple. For the professional consulting for small businesses and nonprofits, that is my training, knowledge, education experience get in a Zoom setting that's low risk for everybody involved, a lower amount of liability. The bookkeeping is really simple. So for me, that made sense for just doing sole proprietorship. What is it? Schedule C in your taxes. Mm-hmm. You just keep your books, and then you do a report, and mine's 1 page that goes in when I file my taxes. Easy peasy and less expensive.
Right.
The LLC came into play for me for both of the other businesses for a few reasons. both with the retreat, with people doing adventure activities up in Alaska, there's simply an increased level of personal risk. Anytime you're having a lot of fun in a wilderness area. And then kind of the same goes for the caravan. We are out in the remote areas where independent travelers we're going to need a little bit of a background for them to stay safe and happy. So I would say the risk for everyone involved, the potential for liability, and with both of these businesses that are LLCs, I am engaging with and partnering with other entities other than myself. So we kind of know who we are and what we do, and we're taking one, as a person, where it's 100% responsibility for what's happening in our business. With these other businesses, I am, for instance, making group reservations at one campground, and for the retreat up in Cordova, I'm paying an outfitter to take us glacier kayaking. So with those elements and those considerations in mind, that's what drove me to do LLCs with the two businesses.
That makes total sense. And I recall Dave Ramsey once giving the advice about like when to formalize an LLC. And I'm a firm believer that you can start a business with a checkbook, a bank account, and a social security number. But he said, once you have a target on your back, then you need to kind of formalize and establish an LLC or other type of entity. Because like you said, it comes down to risk. Once there's major risks involved, and we're going to get into some big risks involved on the Alcan, on the way up, and that sort of thing. So it makes sense to do that. So back to the Caravan to Alaska. Who are the typical customers, or are there any typical demographics that caravan with you in a manageable type of caravan, given some freedom, versus everything done for you versus going on your own?
Yeah, so I would say if I was going to paint a picture of the people who are coming with, it's a little bit of an older crowd. I don't know if that's a function of they might have a little more time and a little more resources. I'd say I'm looking around because I'm thinking about, we just had one of our planning meetings over online with Zoom or something, and I'm looking around the faces right now. I would say that we are all in our 50s and 60s. The majority seem to have been RVing for a number of years and have enjoyed trips in the lower 48 that they have done independently on their own. It's definitely with a lot of people who are excited about the things that they can do in Alaska once they get there on their own. A lot of times when we get up to Alaska, the caravan will disperse, but some people continue to travel together and some people go on their own. So I'd say it's the person who has the time and wherewithal, whether they're employed or not, to, for instance, they have a reliable rig, they're confident operating it, and they feel like they have experience for, say, they've gone cross country in the lower 48. That's probably my demographic.
Okay. So what about the actual rigs? I noticed on your website that you get a wide variety of rigs, but I've been up there in a fifth wheel that we beat the heck out of, and I've been up there in a truck camper. And I noticed a lot of people in kind of overland vehicles, and that's how we decided to go the second time. So do you have a recommendation for the type of rig, or do you screen people's rigs at all to tell them they may or may not make it? A lot of listeners might not realize how rough this road can get.
Yeah, it is kind of a bear. A lot of it is great roads, as good or better than we have in the lower 48. But I know that section up there between Haines Junction and Glen Allen, called Destruction Bay.
Destruction Bay. Yeah. That's where we lost a leaf spring at Destruction Bay. And we were driving carefully. We knew about the frost heaves and to look for the little red flags. But do you have recommendations for people's rigs, or do you see certain rigs and kind of question them?
I have not seen any questionable rigs yet. I feel like I do make it pretty clear on the website that your equipment needs to be in good operating condition. I had thought earlier about making some size requirements on the smaller scale. But this year we have 2 larger rigs with us, and I think it's going to be fine. They're newer and their operators seem experienced to me. I will have to say, not critiquing anyone else's, I guess because I've done the drive and we have allocated 10 days for the trip. Again, 4 hours drive during a summer day, which has about 20 hours daylight, that I have no shame. I have no hesitancy to drive some of those places up in Destruction Bay. I have been clocked, I think, at 8 miles an hour, even though the speed limit is 60 or 65. In places where it's safe to do so. The roads are pretty wide. I don't let anyone get behind me and pressure me if I'm feeling the need to protect my equipment. I'll bring it all the way down to 10 miles an hour if I need to, or of course pull off if that makes sense as well. But a lot of those places are so wide and other people are going pretty slow too. So I'd say that's probably the exhausting part of the drive too. You would think that driving without traffic and driving without stoplights might be always relaxing, but not necessarily the case when you have to keep your eyes out for all of the frost heaves and all the construction.
And wildlife and
wildlife. Yeah.
So it looks like you book 2 trips a year and they tend to sell out. What marketing has worked best for you to do this business?
I guess dropping my creative urges and just flat out naming my business Caravan to Alaska has been helpful, because I believe, and maybe people can check me on this, if you put in Caravan to Alaska in Google, which I think a lot of people would look for, I think I come right up to the top. So that's one avenue. I have done a few podcasts, and I have reached out to some RV aficionado or interest clubs, that type of thing.
Awesome.
What I'd like to do sometime in the not too distant future is get into some private trips as well. So I think maybe approaching some of the clubs out there, Facebook groups, that type of it'd be neat to have everybody coming from the same club or same state.
Smart. There's groups out there that have the same type of rigs or the same model, and you've run retreats for people of similar mind, and to have, that sort of thing on the road for a trip, that's a smart move. But when you get a group of strangers together, how do you manage the group dynamics? You're getting these people together and then bam, they're on the road together in stressful situations sometimes. Maybe they're stuck with each other for 10 plus days. How do you manage certain dynamics, especially, lately with certain factions growing? What do you do to keep levity in the group and everybody having fun?
Yeah. So I think some of the things that help with that is the group is small to begin with. If we were a group that was 40, 50, 60, 80 people big, that's going to be is going to be a bigger concern than, say, 10 people. I believe the characteristics of the caravan that I'm doing are attracting like-minded people to begin with. They are those independent, a little bit more experienced travelers. Focusing on the event, what we have come together to do, have a great time, see an amazing piece of territory, and arrive in Alaska safely is something I always iterate in our meetings and our conversations. I offer we do 3 online meetings before the trip takes place. And the first one is all about introductions. So getting to know each other as far as who we are, where we're coming from, what we're driving, what our experience is, the reasons for coming to Alaska, something we can all bond over. And then talking about the way that we're going to pace the trip, laying out expectations, like exploring what people are going to Alaska for, what they want to see, how do they envision the trip unfolding, So, for instance, in one of our meetings, somebody, I could tell what answer she was looking for, but her, she kind of raised her hand and she was like, so, what time do we typically depart? Because there's morning people, there's evening people, there's people who would like to party at camp, and there's people who would probably like peace and quiet after a drive. So, I read the room, and it sounds like we have a whole bunch of people who enjoy coffee and maybe even last night's fire and a little conversation before we leave. And we're not going to break our necks getting out at camp at 7:00. And we've got all that daylight. So polling our audiences, talking about our mutual expectations, and kind of laying the groundwork for it's all going to work for everyone, but not all of us will feel like it's the trip that they would have done themselves at the time. So what works for the group works for everybody.
You can't please everyone. And I like how you read the room and actually gather online a couple of times so people are actually excited to meet each other. You mentioned expectations. So what are maybe some common first impressions or maybe surprising first impressions about Alaska that you've heard from clients? My first major impression was it is so big. You can drive all day and it's still only another 300 miles to something. And then you get there, it's only another 300 miles. And then it's another 300 miles. It's just so massive to see it all in such a short time is difficult. And Renee says Alaska will try to kill you with the roads, the wildlife, the weather.
Absolutely.
So what have you heard from people that maybe surprised them once they, are on the road a couple of days to Alaska?
I think the biggest surprise right out of the gate you've alluded to, and it's that you are used to looking at a map where your travel experience has been, and the Alaska map, I don't know, maybe it's because since we were kids, Alaska was always that little section of land down in the lower left corner.
Not to scale.
Not to scale. Everything throughout Canada and Alaska is not to scale. If you took a map of Alaska, laid over the lower 48, from the very tip to the very tip, it just about covers the entire continent. So I think people are surprised when they feel like they've put a lot of effort into traveling somewhere for the day, and they go back and they look at the map and it looks like it's 1.5 inches on the map.
Right. Isn't it just amazing? A lot of people don't realize that. I remember I plot our maps as we go for the past 17 years. So I'm plotting the map to Alaska and, we are 7 days into the trip and we took our time getting up there. But I looked at the map and we were maybe a third of the way and we had so much farther to go. But you work online and off, and some of your audience may also be working age. So how do you enjoy Alaska and the trip up while still working? Is it possible to squeeze it all in?
I think so. And my approach is, which I kind of would recommend, and some of this isn't just my opinion, but logistics. I suggest that if people are going to drive to Alaska, even if they are working their own 2 or 3 businesses, just to mark the drive off, because for starters, both with Verizon and AT&T, I have experienced at least half of my commute out of service. So connectivity is going to be an issue the entire drive up, whether you do it 5 days or 10 days. Mark yourself off a vacation to enjoy the drive to Alaska. Once you get into Alaska, if most of your travels are on the road system and through established communities, it's going to be very much like anywhere else you're working in the lower 48. You're going to have connectivity in these established communities. You're going to have libraries and coffee shops for Wi-Fi. So I feel that once you get up into Alaska, that you can work your remote businesses or jobs up there in the same manner that you do in the lower 48. And for when you can't, for the connectivity from Washington State to Alaska, just mark yourself on holiday. Put out out of office email response.
And that's great advice if you ask me, because it also allows you to enjoy the trip, because you might think it's monotony when you see so many black spruce for so many miles, but there's so much to see if you get off the beaten path or just stop and enjoy the trip. I remember one of our friends, we were in Alaska and they came up to visit, and I think he was only in town or in the state for 10 days, but he swore he was going to see it all. He went all the way from the south and all the way up to Fairbanks and all the way over, and he just was driving so many miles per day. I would suggest taking some time off. If you're going to go, take some time off and go see it all. But are there certain highlights? Like if someone's going to make the trip up and they know they're only going to go to Alaska once, so much of it is a must see, but so much of it's so far from each other. What highlights do you recommend? Everyone says, oh, go to Denali or go to the Kenai, but how do you do both? What do you recommend?
Yeah, that is the question. Okay. Even people I've talked to before who said this is going to be their only trip to Alaska, that's another thing I hear, is once they get there, do a little Alaska and come home. They always make a plan to come back in the future.
It happens.
So that's one thing. The other is knowing that even if you do, if you're convinced that you're only going to make it up once, don't try to, and depending on how much time you have, if you have the whole summer, great. But if you only have a month, pick out 2 or 3 sections and really make the most of them. To me, that's what my advice would be. My favorites kind of align up with just the places that I've spent the most time in. One of the things because I am from Cordova or have spent time there, and the Cordova being on the Prince William Sound, you could conceivably do a big circuit of Prince William Sound by traveling, say, from Valdez to Cordova on the ferry for 6 hours, spending some time in Cordova, and then taking another 6-hour ferry to Whittier. So you've crossed Prince William Sound, you've brought your vehicle with you. If you coordinate this in a special way, you can cut maybe some driving time off if you're leaving the state by going to Cordova and then Valdez. So there's some things you can do across Prince William Sound that, you're traveling by RV, but you're incorporating a cruise into your travels.
Yeah.
I'd say South Central. And what I mean by that is Palmer, Talkeetna, and the like. I have a couple of favorites there. Site number 7 at Porcupine Campground in Hope, Alaska.
Hey, there we go. That gets specific.
I really enjoy Hope. Hope is at the end of a what we call just a feeder road in and out of the village of Hope. There's 200 year-round residents. It's a couple of hours south of Anchorage. It's right where Resurrection Creek meets Turnagain Arm. And there's some good restaurants, some recreation like rafting. There's this beautiful it's 2 or 3 campgrounds, but beautiful Porcupine Campground overlooking Turnagain Arm, right at the height of summer with all the fireweed blooming, a pull-through spot, private, overlooking the water. In a town that has live music and a great restaurant, the Dirty Skillet, on the weekends. So wandering around Hope is a favorite thing of mine to do. Staying not too far out from some pretty developed places like the Kenai Peninsula. Seward, although is very busy in the summer with all the tourism, you can still go to Seward and you can get in on some tourist activities that feel exclusive and feel more private. The couple of ones I'm thinking about that are my favorites are Captain Tanya at Seacor Cruises, SEACOR. She and her first mate, Lacey, the 2-women crew, have a 25, 30-foot boat that they take out for a wonderful 6 or 7 hour tour of Kenai National Fjords Park, and that's all by boat. I don't know the minimum that she will close it off so that it's just your group. But even if it's a pickup game of tourism and you're in there with some strangers, you're only in there with maybe 5 other people that you don't know instead of 100 or 200. Right. So getting those small boutique activities in place are really good. Seacor's great. Turning Heads Kennel for a tour of a working Iditarod kennel. very sweet young family that runs that. They do an excellent tour. I think it takes about 2.5 hours. $75 a person, and you get to help them train their dogs by getting in a cart and going for a ride in a summer mushing training circuit on their property. So there's those little things to be found, even in areas that are really high traffic, are fun and good. Palmer is great. I love the community of Palmer. The downtown has Friday Fling and community festivals. All of Alaska, if you are the type of person to partake, it's a great microbrew scene all over the place. And so using the same things that you use in the lower 48 to find some of the things you like and see what the ratings are on Google and stuff it transfers. It works up in Alaska too.
This episode is made possible by Travlefy. Want reliable internet without the hassle? Meet Travlefy. It's portable, high-speed Wi-Fi that's ready to go wherever you are. From road trips to remote cabins. No tricky setup or permanent location required. Just plug in and you're connected. And here's the best part. No contracts, no commitments, and no reactivation fees. Pay only for the months you need. Travlefy connects to the strongest available signal among multiple major networks, so you stay online with confidence, backed by a US-based support team that knows the outdoor lifestyle. Travlefy, simplifying internet while you travel. Visit travlefy.com today. That's TRAVLFI.com. Listeners can save 15% with code RVE at checkout. I think the best advice I heard there that I agree with is pick a region and a few things that might be just a couple 100 miles away from each other, and go to those few and spend time more than just a night. Because when you don't spend a full day, at least cruising a little town, I mean, we went to Valdez instead of Seward. It was one or the other. So we went there because we could go to Whittier, we could do all these different things. And we spent a few days, and sure, we saw the whole thing in one day, but then we could see it again the next day. So take time and get off the beaten path and meet some locals. But when it comes back to the caravan part up and back, we discussed some pros and cons of that type of travel. It clearly attracts a certain type of traveler. But I found a fact on your website I'd love like a brief overview of. It says, why would I pay for something I can plan and do myself? So what's the quick answer to that?
Okay. I would say that taking advantage of someone else's experience is really valuable and can really be several levels up from online research. And to be brief about it, I'll give a concrete example, and I'd like your feedback on this. For instance, because I've done the trip numerous times now, on the first night out, when we leave Washington State, we've got a big day ahead of us. We're going to cross the border. We've all got to cross the border. We're going to go shopping for food that we want to eat in Canada. We're going to do a 4.5-hour drive up into British Columbia. Our first stop, which I've made group reservations for, is at a lovely forested, independently owned RV park where I've become friends with the husband and wife team who own it. The husband part of that team is a former commercial fisherman out of Johnson Strait in British Columbia, and he has access to fresh seafood. They have a food truck right there on the RV park grounds that is like a halibut and chips truck.
Oh, yum.
It is only open on weekends, and we are arriving on a Wednesday. But my friend Diane is going to send me the menu and have me take everyone's orders before we get there. And they're going to open up, these lovely Canadians are going to open up their food truck for us in advance and have our own like personal fish fry. And I just don't think you can get stuff like that from scratch your first time going up. It's just a collection of experiences I've curated over time. And the knowledge, I think, is probably, I'd say the pluses are having a small community to travel with, having that support, and being able to avail yourself to the knowledge that I've curated and the experiences I like to do heading up over 10 days.
Sure, you can stumble across a lot of those things, but they might not be open at the time. When we did go to Valdez, we went literally a day early. Fishing season had not opened yet, and I went to the market, and it was very busy with them getting ready. And I walked in, I said, "So, what do you have today?" And she basically said, "Bait." And the next day, I could have got fresh halibut and salmon and all sorts of things. But You also mentioned support, and that's important. And I'm sure on your caravan, you have certain ways to connect to the world out there. What are some good ways to prepare for the unexpected? Like us spending winter in Alaska, we discovered there's no bad weather, only bad gear. You got to be prepared for these things. And on the road, you got to be prepared, maybe spare tires, whatever it takes. But what are some great ways to prepare for such unexpected circumstances on this trip?
Yeah. So you're right. Gear is important. I would say it's having a contingency fund for any equipment damage or any untoward, say, a medical event or something. Having a little bit of extra resources in funding is always helpful in any untoward situation you get in anywhere in the world, right? So you're going to want to have you're bringing your credit cards. You're going to bring a little bit of cash, not a lot, because most of it can be everything you can do is on credit cards. I suggest to people, for instance, that we check out medevac insurance. I get a membership to Life Med Alaska. It's an annual membership for $49. So that I feel they don't go all the way down into BC, and they don't delineate where they will or will not pick you up in Canada, but they say Northwest Canada. So I feel a little bit covered there. I carry a Garmin InReach, and you're probably familiar with that. It's the little palm-sized satellite that has me connected to the sky. And I have some people in my circle following my dot on the map because I've shared my web link. You've got the SOS button you can hit to activate the network of search and rescue along the way. So that I'm covered that way. I can send and receive text that way. Even if I had the simplest thing of, say, if I was traveling by myself, a damaged tire. It will take some time, but I can text somebody to call AAA for me and have AAA eventually come out and help me. But having communication devices, even in the remote places of Canada, is important. So
the one thing related to that I highly recommend is roadside assistance, because on our trip, we busted a leaf spring. I thought it was a flat tire. No problem. I can change that. And then I realized it's a broken leaf spring. And we had a 6-hour tow of our trailer back to Whitehorse. That would have been thousands of dollars. So I recommend roadside assistance. We had multiple flat tires, and there's all sorts of things you can Google about nightmares. And other people say, oh, I never had a problem. But back to kind of the business side of things, and prior to our discussion, you were mentioning when I talked about like potential topics, you mentioned diversifying your travel and revenue streams. I'm all about diversified revenue streams. We've talked about how you have multiple kind of irons in the fire. What do you mean by diversifying your travel?
Yeah, I feel a lot of us who are doing life this way are the type of people who enjoy experiencing different things from day to day and week to week. So here we have myself going up to Alaska for the summer, but the rest of the time I spend a lot of time in British Columbia and then also in the lower 48. I patched that together. These are my own personal preferences, and this diversity works for me and I enjoy it. So up in the summer, I'm staying with guests in my retreat business in lodges. And then in British Columbia, in the Pacific Northwest, I'm availing myself to some private independent campgrounds, but a lot of state parks, provincial parks, natural recreation areas. And then I was thinking about one of my favorite things that helps me patch together a lot of my travels and can be helpful as a digital nomad business person on the road is house sitting. For those, this might be a little bit of an out-of-the-box answer or resource, but I love traveling in my rig, and yet there's sometimes I'd like to be stationary for 2 to 4 weeks or so, but I'm not interested in renting a place, and I'm not interested in doing an Airbnb. So I have been a member of trustedhousesitters.com for the last 5 or so years. I've done about 33 sits, both in the US and in Canada. They've all been very different. I've met lovely people. I've enjoyed other people's animals, even though I travel with my own. The membership is like $150 a year, and you can sift through in the app. Say, for instance, right now, I'm waiting on that new RV to come in, and I'm down outside the Tucson area. And these people in this it is a lovely house here. And when I arrived, it looked like I was in another planet because I'd been up in the Pacific Northwest for so long, still cold, still rainy. Right. Here, the weather's beautiful and just very southwestern touches. These people have gone to Mexico for a couple of weeks, so I'm in charge of their home and their lovely 13-year-old senior pepperoni.
Oh, so wonderful.
I'm batch cooking. I'm on great Wi-Fi with you. I'm restocking some of my supplies in wonderful stores, and I'm very comfortable. I have got a hot tub out in the fenced yard, and
nice.
Life is good.
So, Trusted House Sitters, I'm going to look that one up because we've done some house sitting and we used Caretaker Gazette. So we'll drop some links in the show notes there. But the whole reason we went to Alaska the second time was that diversity of travel and different experiences. We were just getting too comfortable with our winter resort down here. And it makes me think of a conversation I have on this show many times about the whole life-work balance. Do you believe true life-work balance is attainable, or how would you even define that?
I think it is. I feel very grateful to be able to have my day-to-day life look like this. There are pressures on anyone when they're in business for themselves. You don't even have you're not even fortunate enough to be quote unquote on a fixed income. You don't know what's going to happen next month, but being fully in charge of your own calendar is an amazing feeling. And developing some great business or self-employment hygiene is awesome, where for me, that means establishing some habits and some set hours. As I'm getting older, I'm finding I'm a little bit sharper and brighter in the mornings. That may not be everybody else, but for me, productive time is coffee time, somewhere between 7:30 or 8 and up to maybe 11 or so. So I like to prioritize the things I need to get done for my different businesses and nail out. I tell myself, do 2 or 3 very important things every morning and then relax a little bit for the afternoon. So that's the way I handle the balance, and it's working for me.
So, Kim, we've covered so much about Alaska and the trip up and back. I'm going to refer everyone to your site to read Kim's picks in Alaska for some of your top tips there. But I'm more interested here in some useful tips and tools, kind of specifically for us full-time digital nomads. Do you have any must-have books, apps, or gadgets for the trip up, whether someone is going to join you or take this adventure on their own?
Yeah, I'll have to say I'm a little bit behind. I'm a little old school. Is that analog these days? I'm a pencil and paper kind of gal. But one of the apps that I do enjoy and use, well, there's actually 2 of them, and I'm sure many people in your audience are familiar with them. I enjoy using Allstays and, of course, iOverlander. Those are some good apps to find places to camp, whether it's campground or a pullout. Connectivity wise, though, I maybe this is a feature of me spending so much time by myself. But once I'm in communities, I really do like to go into coffee shops, libraries, the local tavern. There's free Wi-Fi everywhere, of course, and supporting the local economy and getting to meet those locals like you were talking about is really fun. Just make sure you're employing some really great self-employment hygiene while you're enjoying these places. Yeah.
To obtain that live-work balance. To listen to that balance we talked about. So one thing I like to do is prepare people by kind of sharing the good, the bad, and the ugly of things. So what was your worst memory from all of the caravans you led, or any particular trip to Alaska? Is there anything that sticks out that just was not your favorite experience?
Wow. They've all been great. We have not had any emergencies thus far, knock on all the woods. I'd say I had a little bit of in all of my travels. So I've seen a lot of, let me just couch this conversation to say,
Sure.
I have seen a lot of bears. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
They're everywhere, especially in Canada. I mostly see them on the roadside while I'm in my vehicle. I got a close-up, my first and only so far in all of my experience. I got my first close-up of a grizzly bear in one of the most populated campsites on my last drive up. When I had popped out of my little teardrop I call my bed to beach wear. You know, you sleep in it and you can walk around the campground in it. I'm walking my senior dog right in the camp, and I do mean this is like 100-spot campground, and we're not maybe 20 or 30 steps away from the teardrop where I look down, and there's a fresh, hot, steaming pile of bear scat right in front of me. And my neighbors told me he had walked by about 20 minutes before I popped my little dog out, and I won't call that. It's an amazing experience because he was playing around in the campground and I got to take a good look at him. But I will have to say, before coffee and coming that close was a little bit hair raising.
That can be very scary. And we stopped on the Alcan South in the middle of nowhere, and someone had a flat tire, so we stopped to help. And as I'm under the car with this guy, Renee's yelling at us because a bear is approaching. It was a black bear, and he was just curious. Most of them don't want to do any damage, but it can get scary. How about the best experience? What really stands out? I mean, you say it was all great, but there had to be one certain thing that maybe stands out on one of these trips.
You know, even as a part-time local, those small tours that I was telling you about, even if I'm going with paid guests, I'm still rushing to the front of the boats to see the things that we're seeing, like in Kenai National Forest and everything. So one particular experience, very hard to replicate. We found ourselves right next to a group of whales that were bubble net feeding for about an hour right next to the boat. And Captain Tanya at Seacor puts down an audio device outside into the water. And so we were listening to the whales speak amongst themselves, cooperate to get their lunch. And most of us on the boat were crying because it was so moving.
I bet that never gets old on our 2 trips up there, let alone on your, umpteen trips up there. I'm always astounded, even if it's the same thing I've seen before. But where can people best connect with you and learn more if they want to take this on?
Yeah, my website, caravantoalaska.com, is there. It's 3 simple pages, a little bit about the dates for 2026. I just opened registration for those, and we're starting to see some signups. There's an about page about how we got here and what we're doing. And then I feel it's a pretty extensive FAQ section to answer all the questions you might have about coming with us. And then, of course, my email and my phone number on there too. So
wonderful. Caravantoalaska.com makes sense. And I bet if you do Google Caravan to Alaska, you're going to appear way up there. So that was a smart move on you and branding. Kim, I think we could talk for hours about Alaska because I was passionate and I do want to get back there again. Can't thank you enough. Is there any final comments you care to add?
Yeah, I'm kind of glad that we didn't get into the whole how to see Denali thing, because that's an hour-long podcast on itself. Getting there, doing it, and enjoying it, but maybe next time.
Spoiler alert, I think it's more of a how not to see Denali. We were there for months before we realized it's right in front of us from downtown Willow. So you may spend all your money and all your time to go to Alaska to see Denali. Please don't be surprised if you miss it, because she's right there and she's very elusive.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Kim, thanks again so much.
Thank you, Jim. It's been a pleasure. It's been really fun talking to you.
North to Alaska. Renee and I made the trip twice, and oh, how I look forward to getting back up there again. I think some of the best advice Kim provided, though, was to plan to take some time off. We can't all do that, but I highly recommend it. There really is no way to get the full Alaska experience without taking your time. You need to get off the beaten path and spend some time with locals. Okay, many of the paths are pretty beaten up, so make sure your rig is in good shape. And you're up for the adventure. It's yet another reason to take your time. And if you're planning to explore the last frontier while keeping your own business going, remember,
having a little bit of extra resources and funding is always helpful in any situation you get in anywhere in the world.
RV Life Pro isn't just a service. It's an all-in-one solution designed to make your RV experience simpler and more enjoyable. From planning your trip with precision to maintaining your RV with ease, we've got you covered every step of the way. Don't just survive the RV lifestyle, thrive in it. Visit rvlife.com to discover more about how RV Life Pro can enhance your journey.